Hello and welcome back to Farmyard Care. Let me ask you something. What if part of your feed bill could start falling from the sky year after year? No seed to buy, no expensive sprays to apply, and no tractor needed to bring it in. It sounds unbelievable at first, but it is real, and it comes from trees. Today we're looking at a quiet shift happening on farms all over the world. For years, many people were taught that a successful farm had to look clean, flat, and planted wall-to-wall in corn or soybeans. But more and more practical farmers are now seeing the true cost of that system in their soil, their livestock budget, and their bottom line. If you care about healthier land, stronger gardens, better feed options, lower input costs, and a farm that can keep producing for years, this really matters. In this video, I'll show you why smart farmers are growing trees instead of corn, how those trees can feed animals, rebuild tired ground, and change the way you think about productivity. So if you enjoy honest, useful farm wisdom here on Farmyard Care, make sure you subscribe, and let's get into it. Part 1. The illusion of the clean field. Let's step back for a moment. If you were raised around farming in the 1950s or 60s, you were probably taught one clear lesson: produce as much as possible, no matter the cost. A good field was supposed to look perfectly clean, freshly plowed, and ready to start from scratch every single season. But what we called a clean field was often just lifeless soil. To chase bigger yields, farmers were pushed into depending on synthetic fertilizer, herbicides, and pesticides, following fixed schedules year after year, without stopping to ask what all of it was doing to the land beneath their feet. And that brings us to the question that really matters. Was that system ever truly profitable? The people selling the inputs rarely wanted anyone to run the numbers too closely. Now, fertilizer prices have surged, in some cases doubling in only a few years, while margins on conventional row crops have become painfully thin. After decades of tilling, spraying, and forcing production, the natural biology of the soil has been stripped down, leaving behind a system that looks productive on the surface, but is weak underneath. We traded long-term resilience for short-term output. But what if the way forward is not more chemicals, more passes, and more expense? What if the real answer starts with deeper roots? Part 2, The Forgotten Harvest, a history of tree fodder. And once you start asking that question, the next step is to look backward. Feeding livestock from trees is not some fashionable new idea dreamed up in recent years. It is one of the oldest survival strategies in agriculture. Early American settlers and indigenous communities depended heavily on honey locust and mesquite pods to help livestock make it through hard, lean winters. In Europe, whole farming systems were built around tree mast. Chestnuts and acorns were not just something animals found in the woods by chance. They were a serious feed source and a major part of regional meat production. Think about the famous Iberian hams of Spain. That high-value pork still comes from pigs finished on acorns. And during World War II, when grain shipments into Britain were cut off, farmers did not simply fold. They finished pigs on acorns and chestnuts because that was the resource they had. And it worked. There was no imported grain and no cheap soy propping up the system, just trees helping carry the food supply through a time of crisis. So why did this practice fade? Not because it failed, but because subsidized corn became cheap enough to push tree fodder out of the rotation. The economics changed, but now with input costs climbing again, those old trees are starting to look like smart partners for the future. Part 3, Defying the Numbers, Yields and Nutrition that Rival Corn. Now, I can already hear the objection. Trees cannot possibly compete with a cornfield when it comes to feed. But this is where the numbers get interesting. A single mature honey locust can drop anywhere from 50 to 100 pounds of pods in one fall. Put 100 productive trees on an acre, and suddenly you are looking at 4,000 to 10,000 pounds of feed per acre. That is not a novelty yield. That begins to rival low-end corn. And the real surprise is the feed quality. Many people assume tree fodder is rough, woody, and nutritionally weak, but honey locust pods regularly test at 12 to 18% protein and can contain up to 35% sugars. In plain terms, that is a serious energy source, right up there with cracked corn. Mesquite pods in Texas trials have also shown sugar levels reaching around 30%. And unlike corn, the fiber in these pods is highly digestible for cattle, goats, and sheep. Trials in Argentina found that goats finished about 20% faster when honey locust pods were added to the ration, with better body condition and quicker market readiness. Even the USDA looked at this back in the 1930s, studying honey locust as a full-grain replacement for smaller farms. The math made sense then, and in many ways it makes even more sense now. One mature honey locust can produce more calories than an acre of oats, and once that tree is established, it keeps doing it year after year without replanting. Part 4. The animal-tree symbiosis, Silvopasture. And this is where the system really starts to come alive. When you bring trees and animals together, you create what we call silvopasture. And in practical farming terms, it can change almost everything. Start with the animals themselves. As our summers grow hotter and more unpredictable, shade is no longer a nice extra, it is essential. A cow resting under a healthy tree is simply under less stress. And when cattle stay cooler, they spend more time grazing and less energy fighting the heat. That usually means better gains, better milk flow, and calmer animals overall. But the real advantage shows up when those pods begin to fall. Every pod a cow picks up from the ground is feed you did not have to mow, bale, haul, stack, or purchase. The animals are harvesting for themselves. Then the pigs come in and clean up what is left behind. On some farms, pigs have been observed eating 15 to 20 pounds of pods a day, turning what could have been wasted into valuable pork. And while all of this is happening, those animals are also fertilizing the system right where it needs it most. Their manure goes back into the soil under the trees, feeding the next cycle of growth without a spreader truck or tractor pass. That is true symbiosis. And when cattle are moved regularly through holistic or mob grazing, they do not stay in one spot long enough to overdo the damage, which helps keep the grass under the canopy thick, green, and productive. Now let's talk about the part no farmer can ignore, the numbers. Because no matter how beautiful a system looks, it still has to pay. A cornfield may bring in a respectable gross figure, but the real question is what is left after expenses. Once you take out the cost of seed, fertilizer, diesel, repairs, and equipment wear, the net margin can get painfully thin in a hurry. That is where trees begin to change the balance sheet. Species like mesquite and locust are legumes, which means they can pull nitrogen from the air and move it into the soil. A stand of mesquite can fix roughly 50 to 150 pounds of nitrogen per acre each year. At current fertilizer prices, that can translate into $100 to $150 worth of fertility per acre without writing another check. Then there is the feed value. About 2,000 pounds of pods can equal roughly $250 to $300 worth of hay. And if a dense acre is dropping 10,000 pounds of pods, you may be looking at more than $1,000 in feed value per acre coming down from the trees. Some regenerative farmers call that sky feed, and honestly, that is exactly what it feels like. Research comparing monocropping with agroforestry systems has shown that adding trees can make farms significantly more profitable over time. One grazier in Kentucky who finished hogs on locust pods reduced his cost by 30% compared with buying corn. Once the trees are established, the ongoing overhead becomes remarkably low. You are not just cutting costs for one season, you are creating a system that can keep paying you back for decades. Healing the earth, soil, water, and resilience. But the story does not end with profit, because every good farmer knows the land is the real foundation. Conventional farming has too often left soil bare, tired, and vulnerable to erosion. Trees do the opposite. They begin repairing what repeated disturbance has broken down. Their root systems reach 4 to 6 feet into the soil, pushing through hard, compacted layers that annual crops often cannot penetrate. Those deep roots work like living pumps, drawing moisture upward and helping nearby grasses hold on longer through dry spells and summer heat. Up above, the tree canopy cuts evaporation by roughly 20 to 40%, creating a cooler, more stable microclimate for the pasture below. Then autumn arrives and the leaves fall, forming a natural mulch that breaks down slowly, feeds earthworms, supports soil microbes, and helps store carbon deeper in the ground. These are not just nice ideas, they show up in the field. In Australia, 16 years of data found that pastures with native leguminous trees delivered a 40% greater return than fully cleared land, largely because the forage stayed greener, richer, and more resilient. That is the bigger shift happening here. Your farm stops behaving like a fragile factory and starts functioning like a living system, one that can handle drought, flooding, and hard seasons with far more strength. Part 7. The hidden bonus, cashing in on carbon credits. And if all of that were not enough, there is one more layer that deserves attention: carbon credits. For many farmers, this still sounds complicated, but the basic idea is simple. Large companies are under pressure to offset their emissions, and many are willing to pay landowners who can store carbon in healthy soils and growing tree biomass. The moment you begin establishing trees across a pasture or farm system, you are not just producing feed and shade, you are also building a carbon sink. Depending on the species, the density, and where your farm is located, an acre of trees may generate anywhere from 1 to 10 carbon credits in a year. At premium market prices, where high-quality credits can sell for around $25 to $50 each, that could mean an extra $25 to $500 per acre simply for allowing a well-designed tree system to mature. In parts of the Midwest Corn Belt, some soil carbon programs are already paying farmers roughly $15 to $35 per acre each year for regenerative practices. Yes, there is paperwork involved, and yes, many programs require long-term commitment, but it is still a remarkable opportunity. In a business where every dollar is fought for, getting paid to improve your land, support your animals, and benefit the environment is no small thing. The reality check, navigating the challenges. Now, with that said, let me be completely straight with you. Agroforestry is not a shortcut, and it is not magic. It offers real rewards, but it also comes with real challenges, and those need to be respected from the beginning. First, genetics matter more than many people realize. Wild honey locusts can carry huge, dangerous thorns and produce inconsistent pods. If you put the wrong trees into a grazing system, you can turn a promising pasture into a serious management headache. That is why improved, thornless, sweet pod varieties matter so much. Second, there is the issue of timing. Corn gives you a return in a matter of months. Trees do not. In many cases, you may wait 5 to 7 years before pod production becomes truly meaningful. That means this approach asks for patience and long-term thinking. You are trading speed for stability and short-term gratification for a system that can support the next generation. Then there is shade management. Too much canopy can absolutely reduce grass production if the layout is poor. The solution is good design, spacing the rows correctly, pruning when needed, and using rotational grazing to keep the pasture balanced. When it is done right, studies suggest tree rows can increase total livestock carrying capacity by as much as 40%. So yes, this takes planning, observation, and adaptability. But the payoff is a farm that starts doing more of the work for you. And when you step back and look at the whole picture, the choice starts to feel a lot clearer. We can keep fighting nature, pouring money into chemicals, fuel, and fragile systems that leave us with thin margins and tired land. Or we can begin working with nature instead of against it, By growing trees instead of relying only on corn, we can build farms that drop feed from the sky, enrich their own soil, shelter livestock through heat, and even return extra value through carbon income. These kinds of systems help feed nations long before industrial grain took over, and there is every reason to believe they can play that role again. So the real question is not whether trees belong on the farm. The real question is what kind of future you want your land to have, and what kind of legacy you want to leave behind. Thank you so much for spending this time with us on Farmyard Care. If this changed the way you think about pasture, feed, or long-term farm profit, be sure to subscribe, give this video a thumbs up, and share it with a farmer who is tired of buying feed instead of growing it. And before you go, tell me in the comments, would you plant feed trees on your farm? Until next time, keep observing, keep growing, and take care of your farmyard.